I opened my apartment door with one hand pressed gently against my abdomen, still sore from surgery, and tried to steady myself long enough to accept the Amazon package the delivery driver held out. My muscles were trembling from the effort of standing, and the cool hallway air rushed against my skin in a way that made the incision sites under my loose shirt throb. I thanked the driver, forced a weak smile, and took the box. Before I could close the door, a shadow shifted behind him. Samantha stepped forward without a word, slipping into my apartment before the door even touched the frame. My breath caught instantly, as if someone had pressed ice against the back of my neck. Samantha had followed the delivery driver inside, positioning herself perfectly so I would not see her until she was already over the threshold. I did not understand how she even found my building, let alone arrived at the exact moment a stranger opened the door for her. She moved past me with the same unsettling confidence she always had, her shoes clicking softly across the hardwood floor. I shut the door in reflex, but the room already felt different, like all the air had been pushed into corners and left me with none. Samantha stood still near the coffee table and turned to face me. Her expression was carved from something hard, something that did not bend or warm or shift. She studied the outline of the bandages under my shirt, then looked into my face with the kind of certainty only people who refuse to doubt themselves carry. "Why are you here?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin, barely audible even to me. Samantha tilted her head slightly, as if she could not believe I had the nerve to ask. "I came to see the truth. Mom and Dad said you had surgery. Again!" She dragged the last word like a dull blade across a nerve. I leaned my shoulder against the wall for balance, my fingers tightening around the Amazon box. I had barely returned home from the hospital. My fever rose and fell in uneven waves. I had not slept more than a few hours at a time. The last thing I needed was Samantha filling the room with suspicion and coldness. "You did this for attention," she said, stepping closer. "You always do. You have been performing weakness since we were kids." I felt the familiar sting of her words cut deeper than the physical pain in my abdomen. I shook my head slowly. "I am not performing anything. I had real surgery. You need to leave." She ignored the request and walked straight into the kitchen. I followed her with my eyes, but my body was too weak to move. She opened drawers one after another like she was searching for something specific. When she stopped at the drawer nearest the sink, dread crawled up my spine. She reached in and lifted the small fruit knife I kept there for peeling apples. It was unremarkable, harmless under normal circumstances. But in Samantha's hand, with her gaze locked on me, it felt like something entirely different. My knees softened. My pulse hammered against my ribs. She approached with the knife angled downward, not in a dramatic or threatening way, but with a disturbingly calm purpose. "If you did not fake the surgery, you will not mind if I check it myself." Her voice was steady, almost bored, as if what she was about to do was a simple errand she needed to cross off her list. I pressed my free hand against my abdomen protectively. Samantha's lip lifted into a small, mocking smile. "Still hiding things. You always hide. You want everyone to believe you are so brave and delicate, that you suffer more than anyone." She closed the distance in 3 slow steps. I tried to turn away, but she grabbed the hem of my shirt and jerked it upward. The bandages came into view, taped carefully over the 4 small surgical incisions. Samantha gripped the gauze covering the largest one. "Samantha, stop. Please do not." She did not listen. She peeled the gauze back just enough to expose the line of stitches, then pressed the dull side of the knife against them. I felt the cold metal touch my skin before pain shot through me like a live wire. Samantha dragged the blunt edge hard enough to catch the thread of the top stitch. It snapped. Blood seeped immediately from the reopened wound, darkening the gauze that still covered part of it. I gasped and stumbled to my knees, dropping the Amazon box. It hit the floor with a hollow thud, but Samantha did not look away from the blood. She stepped back just far enough to assess it, her eyes shining with triumph. She did that herself, she announced loudly, as if someone else was in the room. "She wants attention. She always has. She always will." I tried to breathe through the pain, but each inhale felt shallow and panicked. Warmth pooled under my palm as I pressed my hand against the bleeding incision. My body swayed forward, and I lowered myself to the floor, half sitting and half collapsing. Samantha took one more step back. Her expression did not soften. It hardened. "You have fooled people your entire life," she said. "Not me." The last thing I saw before my vision blurred was her lowering the knife to her side as if she had proven something, and the world dimmed around the edges until everything slipped into a cold, heavy darkness. My name is Grace, and if you had told me even a few months ago that I would one day sit down and share this story, I would have laughed or maybe cried depending on the day. I never imagined I would feel compelled to talk about something so raw, so humiliating, and so frightening that it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I never imagined I would have to explain to strangers why my own sister walked into my home, lifted the hem of my shirt, and used a kitchen knife to test whether my surgery was real. But I also never imagined I would be the kind of person who let years of silence, denial, and fear shape the way I survived my own family. Maybe that is why I am telling this now. Maybe I am finally tired of carrying blame that never belonged to me in the first place. I am not sharing this for sympathy. I am not sharing it for shock value, even though the moment it happened felt like something out of a nightmare I did not know I had been living inside. I am sharing it because people often ask why someone would cut contact with their own sibling, why someone would build an entire life in another state and still flinch when the phone rings with a familiar number. They ask it with disbelief or judgment or sometimes quiet curiosity. This is why. This is the story I never wanted to tell but can no longer keep inside, because pretending everything was normal almost cost me more than my physical safety. If you are hearing this for the first time, thank you for listening. If you choose to stay through the rest of the story, it means more than you know. And if any part of you feels the weight of familiarity in what I am describing, I want you to know you are not imagining things. It took me far too long to understand that truth. Before I go any further, if you are watching this or reading this, I hope you will consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. It helps more than you think, and it tells platforms that stories about real people and real experiences matter. I am not proud of how long I tolerated what I did. I am not proud of the excuses I made for Samantha, or the way I convinced myself that wanting peace made me weak. I used to think family was something you endured no matter the cost. Now I understand something different, something harder, something far more liberating. But this did not start with a knife. It did not start with blood or panic or the cold shock of realizing the person hurting me had once shared toys and bedrooms and family holidays. It started decades ago, long before adulthood, long before hospital rooms and sterile gauze and trembling breaths. To understand what happened in my apartment that afternoon, I need to take you back to where everything truly began. When I think back to where things truly began, my mind always returns to the same place. A small house on the edge of Casper, Wyoming, where the wind never seemed to stop and where the quiet between storms felt heavier than the storms themselves. Samantha and I shared a bedroom until I was old enough to insist I needed my own space, though space never saved me from her attention. From the earliest years, something in the dynamic between us was tilted, like the ground had already shifted in her favor before I was old enough to understand what balance even meant. I remember small things first. Toys disappearing from my shelf only to appear broken behind the garage. Paint sets ruined with muddy water. Dolls with missing limbs. When I would cry or ask why she did it, Samantha would shrug and say, "I must have done it myself without realizing." Sometimes she would do it with such conviction that I doubted my own memory, which should never happen to a child, but somehow became common for me. Our parents chalked it up to normal sibling rivalry. Kids fight. Kids break things. Kids blame each other. It seemed easier for them to believe that than to recognize a pattern forming beneath the surface. Samantha was always quick to take advantage of their willingness to dismiss things. Once, when I spent a whole week working on a spelling project that involved writing vocabulary words on colored cards, Samantha waited until the night before it was due to scatter them across the backyard. When Mom asked why I had not turned in my assignment, Samantha spoke before I could. She said I had thrown them outside because I liked the way the wind made them dance. When I said she was lying, she narrowed her eyes and said I was being dramatic again. Mom gave her a look, the kind that said she was disappointed in both of us, and sent us to our rooms. Samantha smiled the whole way down the hallway. I remember another moment just as clearly. I was riding my bike near the sidewalk while Samantha walked behind me. The tires wobbled on the gravel when I took a sharp turn, and before I could steady myself, I fell and scraped my knee open. The sting shot up my leg, and I burst into tears. Samantha stood over me with her arms crossed and said loud enough for neighbors to hear that I must have fallen on purpose because I wanted Mom to fuss over me. When Mom came out with disinfectant and bandages, Samantha repeated the same thing with an innocent expression so rehearsed it almost impressed me. Mom laughed it off, unaware of the pinched feeling I carried silently in my chest. Even in moments that should have been simple, Samantha created shadows that followed me. I think about the night I had a fever so high that I could barely keep my eyes open. I was trembling under layers of blankets, my throat raw, my head pounding. Mom stayed by my side, wiping my forehead with a cool cloth. Samantha stood in the doorway and scoffed that I always faked being sick. She said it with such casual certainty that Mom sighed and told her to stop, but did not question why she believed that in the first place. Samantha walked away muttering that I enjoyed being the center of attention. I remember staring at the ceiling that night, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading, wondering what it would feel like to be believed without hesitation. As we grew older, the emotional landscape between us only grew more uneven. Samantha was always reaching for more, needing more, demanding more. If Dad praised me for something, she would find something else to outperform or destroy. If Mom hugged me after a rough day, Samantha would interrupt with a problem of her own. It never ended. I had no words for it then. I only had the sensation of being monitored, judged, and punished for things I did not do. Emotional undulation was the only rhythm I knew. One moment I felt small bursts of pride when my teacher complimented my reading. The next moment I felt that pride collapse when Samantha told everyone I had probably cheated or exaggerated my accomplishments. I felt warmth when Dad taught me how to fly a kite, and then I felt it twist into embarrassment when Samantha loudly declared I only managed it because the wind did all the work. I lived on those waves of up and down without ever experiencing the steady ground other kids seemed to have under their feet. What I did not understand at the time was how deeply Samantha believed her own narratives. If she told herself I was pretending or lying or reaching for attention, she treated that thought as absolute truth. If I cried when she pushed me or accused me of something, she said I cried because I liked being dramatic. If I stood silent, she said my silence meant guilt. There was no version of me she would accept unless it fit the role she assigned. There was one afternoon that still lingers in my memory, like a scene from a film I cannot stop rewatching. I was sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet trying to finish a school project when Samantha walked in with a stack of papers. She said she needed help, and before I could respond, she deliberately knocked her knee against the coffee table and let the papers scatter. She yelped loud enough for Mom to hear. When Mom rushed in, Samantha pointed at me and said very convincingly that I had shoved the table into her leg because I got mad about not being the center of attention. I sat frozen, confused, and hurt. Mom frowned and gave me a long lecture about kindness, fairness, and sharing space. Samantha stood behind her arms folded, chin-raised eyes filled with triumph. It was the first time I realized something was wrong that went beyond ordinary childhood cruelty. Something was wrong in a way I could not articulate. Something about Samantha felt unpredictable, sharp, and hungry for control. As a child, all I could do was brace myself for the next wave, and the next, and the next. The pattern I saw in her then was the faint outline of something that would one day grow into the knife she pressed against my stitches. Entering my teenage years should have given me a sense of independence, a chance to redefine myself outside the shifting shadows of childhood, but instead it marked the period where Samantha sharpened her skills with a precision that felt almost practiced. If childhood was a slow erosion of my confidence, adolescence became the stage where Samantha learned how to twist perceptions so subtly that I often wondered if she had rehearsed each move in advance. It was not enough for her to tell people I exaggerated things. She began planting doubts before anything even happened. I remember the first week of freshman year when I came home excited because my English teacher had praised my essay. Before I even finished my sentence at the dinner table, Samantha said that the teacher probably felt sorry for me because she knew I struggled socially. Dad laughed gently and told her not to be rude, but Samantha added in a quiet tone that only Mom seemed to catch that I had a habit of embellishing things. I knew it was meant to sound insightful, like she was offering a warning, rather than delivering an insult. My excitement dimmed without fully dying, but I felt foolish for having shared it. That became her strategy throughout high school. Any achievement I had became something she needed to adjust in the eyes of others. If I earned an A on a test, Samantha would mention to Mom that maybe the class was graded generously that semester. If I was invited to a friend's birthday, she wondered aloud if I only got an invitation because the girl's mother insisted on including everyone. Even when she said these things with a joking tone, she maintained an expression that suggested she believed every word. It was not always direct sabotage. Sometimes it was far more subtle. If I told our parents I was not feeling well, Samantha would roll her eyes and suggest I was being dramatic. If I said nothing, she would whisper that my silence was suspicious and that maybe I was hiding something. There was no version of me she allowed to exist without critique. The more she talked, the more confident she grew in her creativity. She once told my guidance counselor that she worried I might be developing Munchausen tendencies, using a term I was absolutely certain she barely understood. When the counselor pulled me aside to ask gentle, probing questions, I felt the kind of humiliation that burns deep beneath the skin. I tried explaining that Samantha was exaggerating, but by then I could hear something new in the counselor's tone: uncertainty. Samantha had planted enough seeds that even adults began to water them without meaning to. The worst moments, though, were the ones that blended emotional manipulation with physical evidence. When I sprained my wrist during PE, Samantha told everyone I had probably hit it against the wall on purpose because I enjoyed dramatic entrances to the nurse's office. When I earned a perfect score on a group project, she told the girls in my class that I must have copied parts of it from somewhere because I was not usually that creative. They repeated her words back to me without questioning their source. It chipped away at me far more effectively than broken toys ever had. One afternoon stands out more than the others. I was sitting at the kitchen table finishing a math worksheet when Samantha walked in with a smirk that warned me she already had something planned. She said she needed tape for a poster, and I told her it was in the drawer. Instead of getting it, she leaned against the refrigerator and asked if I had finished my homework. I nodded and kept writing. The next thing I knew, she knocked her hip against the table hard enough to send my pencil rolling and my paper sliding to the floor. She let out a sharp yelp just as Mom walked into the room. Samantha pointed at me and said I had shoved the table because I was frustrated with the assignment. Mom asked why I would do something like that, and before I could defend myself, Samantha rubbed her hip and said she understood I was under a lot of stress. She delivered the words like a saint, offering forgiveness. Mom turned to me with disappointment, saying I needed to control my emotions and stop taking things out on my sister. I stood there stunned, unable to form a coherent sentence. Even if I protested, Samantha would find a way to twist the story further. My silence became her proof. The more this pattern continued, the more isolated I became. Friends at school started reacting strangely when I talked about my life. They hinted that Samantha had told them I was dramatic or prone to exaggeration. A few even said they were surprised I was not faking being sick, as often as they had heard. Somehow, she had built a version of me that did not match who I was, yet became the version people believed. Teachers also treated me differently. When I came to school pale and exhausted after a weekend of migraines, my history teacher asked if I was trying to avoid a quiz. She said Samantha had mentioned I got headaches before tests. I felt a lump in my throat but said nothing. Fighting her narratives only made them stronger. I learned to shrink myself so she would have fewer pieces to rearrange. Emotional undulation shaped every interaction. Some days, Samantha was strangely kind, offering me a cookie or sitting next to me during a movie. On those days, I dared to hope something had changed. Then the next morning, she would accuse me of faking allergies or tell Mom I had acted strangely during breakfast. I lived in a constant cycle of relief and dread, believing I was overreacting one moment and then feeling the truth slam back into me the next. The turning point came during a winter afternoon when I fractured my wrist. I had slipped on black ice near the school entrance. The pain was sharp and immediate, and my friend Emma rushed to help me. But by the time we got home, Samantha had already told our parents I was pretending to be hurt because I wanted to skip a family gathering that evening. She delivered her speech with confidence, adding details I had never said, implying I had practiced a limp earlier in the day. It was not until the doctor held up my x-ray that Mom's expression shifted from irritation to shock. Even then, Samantha only shrugged and said fractures could be faked if you knew how to fall correctly. I remember looking at her then with a clarity I had never felt before. Something in her smile told me that she believed her own lies, or needed to believe them, and I realized that nothing I did would ever change the story she constructed around me. It was the first time I understood danger not as a single moment, but as a pattern that would one day follow me far beyond adolescence. The moment I first understood that something was truly wrong did not arrive like a bolt of lightning or a dramatic revelation. It came quietly in the kind of silence that makes your stomach drop before your mind even begins to process what happened. I was sitting on the edge of my bed one Saturday afternoon, working on a small craft project for school. Samantha walked into the room without knocking, something she had done for years, and held out her hand. She asked if I had seen her bracelet, the silver one with the tiny turquoise stone that she claimed was her favorite. I shook my head and said I had not touched it. She stared at me for a long moment, long enough for my heartbeat to stutter, and then walked out of the room without saying anything else. I thought that was the end of it. It should have been the end of it. But an hour later, Mom called both of us into the hallway. Samantha stood beside her, tears welling in her eyes, holding her wrist as if she were hurt. Mom looked at me with confusion and concern and asked why I had pushed Samantha into the dresser. I blinked at her, completely stunned. Pushed her? I had been sitting on my bed the entire time. Samantha sniffed and lifted her sleeve, revealing a thin red scrape along her forearm. It was not deep, barely more than a scratch, but it looked fresh. Mom turned to me, waiting for an explanation. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Samantha spoke first. She said she had asked me calmly about her bracelet, and that I had gotten angry and shoved her. She said I had always been jealous of her things. She said I pushed harder than I meant to, and that she tried to forgive me, but the scrape still hurt. She said all of this with a steady voice that wavered only when she wanted it to timed perfectly with her sniffles. I stared at her, feeling something crack in the back of my mind. I insisted I had not touched her. Mom asked where Samantha's bracelet was. I said I had no idea. Samantha said she found it under my bed after the incident. She held it up as proof. The turquoise stone glinted in the hallway light. I felt like the floor tilted under me. I knew I had not put it there. Put it. I knew I had not pushed her. I knew the scratch had not been caused by anything I had done. But I also knew that my protests sounded weaker than her performance. Mom rubbed her temple and told me she was disappointed, then told Samantha to get some ice for her arm. Samantha walked away slowly, glancing back at me with an expression that told me she was measuring my reaction. For the first time in my life, I felt fear. Not the kind of fear that storms in loudly, but the kind that crawls beneath your skin and settles there. A cold, slow dread I had never experienced before. Later that evening, after the tension in the house softened and my parents settled in the living room, I saw Samantha in the kitchen. She stood at the counter alone, her sleeve pushed up, examining the small scrape. She pressed her finger to it, winced slightly, then adjusted her expression. I watched from the doorway, quiet as a shadow. She did not know I was there. I saw her lift the bracelet off the counter, turn it over, then lower herself onto the floor. She slid the bracelet under the edge of the cabinets. Not under my bed, not anywhere near my room. Under the cabinets where she had clearly planned to retrieve it later. She stood up, brushed off her hands, and smiled to herself in a way that made something inside me twist. It was not the smile of someone who was relieved. It was the smile of someone who believed she had accomplished something. My breath caught. For a moment, I could not move. The scrape on her arm, the bracelet planted under my bed, the practiced tremble in her voice when she told Mom the story. It all snapped into place like puzzle pieces I had not realized were connected. She had done it to herself. She had planned it. She had executed it with a confidence that made it feel rehearsed. And she knew exactly what she was doing. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bloodless scrape on her forearm and the calm way she inspected it, almost admiring her own handiwork. I kept replaying the moment when I stood speechless in front of Mom while Samantha narrated her fiction as if it were fact. It was the first time I understood that Samantha was not merely cruel. She was calculated. She was precise. She was willing to harm herself just enough to make herself believable. She was willing to hurt me without laying a hand on me, and she was willing to make sure no one else ever saw the truth. From that day forward, I knew I had to be careful. Whatever she was capable of then was only a shadow of what she would be capable of later. And though I did not know it at the time, that calculated scrape on her arm was the first warning of the knife she would one day press against my stitches. Leaving home should have felt like a clean break, a breath of fresh air after years of holding mine. But the truth is, it felt more like stepping out of a burning house with smoke still clinging to my skin. I left for Denver the moment I graduated, telling my parents I wanted better opportunities, a new environment, a place where I could grow. All of that was true, but none of it touched the real reason. I needed distance from Samantha. I needed space to figure out who I was without her voice telling the world something different. I found a small apartment near the design school I had worked so hard to get into. It was not much. The carpet was old, the windows whistled during winter gusts, and the shower made a groaning sound when it heated up, but it was mine. It felt like a room where the walls did not echo Samantha's interpretations of my life. For the first time in years, I could place an object somewhere and trust it would still be there when I returned. I could say I felt tired without being accused of faking. I could cry without someone stepping in to call my tears a manipulation. The silence in that apartment was so new it felt loud, but in the best way. That was where I met Elena. She lived 2 doors down a nursing student who always carried too many books and walked like she was in a hurry, even when she was not. We bumped into each other while hauling groceries up the stairs, and she insisted on helping me, despite the fact that her bag was just as heavy as mine. She talked fast, laughed loudly, and listened intently. I did not know how much I needed a person like that until she became one of the closest friendships I had ever experienced. Elena did not question my experiences. She did not twist my words or rewrite my stories. She simply listened, asked genuine questions, and made me feel seen. It was strange at first, like wearing new shoes that did not rub the skin raw. My life settled into a rhythm. I woke up early, attended classes, worked on design sketches, and pulled extra shifts at a small home goods store a few evenings a week. It was exhausting, but satisfying. I felt like I was finally building something. My professors praised my creativity. I began finding my own style, my own voice. The kind of pride I felt during those years was quiet but solid. For the first time, I could trust that my accomplishments were real. I did not share much with my family during that time. Calls home were short and polite. Mom would update me about home repairs or Dad's fishing trips. Samantha rarely appeared in these conversations except for moments when Mom would say something like, "Samantha has been very busy," or "You should call her sometime." I never did, and Samantha never called me. It was the absence of her voice that kept my lungs open. It is strange how peace can feel unfamiliar after years of turbulence. I would lie awake sometimes listening to the hum of the building, imagining what my life might have been like if Samantha had been different, if she had been a sister instead of a shadow. There were small reminders that she still existed. I noticed she occasionally liked a post of mine online, though she never commented. I saw her name pop up when I called home, overheard faint questions from her in the background. It made me uneasy, but I learned to breathe through it. Denver became my sanctuary. I found comfort in the routines. I watched seasons shift through my apartment windows. I took long walks to clear my mind. I celebrated small victories like getting my first paid design job through a local boutique. Elena and I became inseparable. We cooked dinner together on nights we both had energy, watched movies on the floor with blankets strewn everywhere, and shared stories from childhood. When I told her parts of my past, she listened without judgment, but her eyes softened in a way that made me realize how abnormal my experiences had been. She said I deserved better. It took me a long time to accept that as truth. My relationship with my parents evolved into something cordial but distant. They seemed confused by the space I kept between myself and Samantha, but they never pushed too hard. They believed in keeping the peace. I believed in survival. And then came the day when the isolated peace I built began cracking again without warning, without provocation. I had been working on a project late into the night, finishing up sketches for a client presentation. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Mom, a photo of Samantha holding a certificate from her workplace. Mom had written, "Proud of your sister," and added a few heart emojis. I stared at the picture longer than I meant to. Samantha smiled widely and as confident as ever. I wondered what version of me she had told her coworkers existed. I wondered if she told them stories of a dramatic younger sister who always pretended to be sick. I wondered what narrative she had crafted there. For a moment, the old tension crept up my spine. It was subtle but unmistakable. That message reminded me of something I had been pretending I no longer felt. Distance is not final. Peace is not permanent. Not when the source of your harm still believes you belong in the story she writes. And yet, as months passed, Denver kept me grounded. I finished school, got hired by a small design firm, and moved into a newer apartment with better lighting and fewer drafts. Elena stayed just as close in my life. Samantha stayed just as distant. I felt stable. I felt like maybe I had escaped the worst of it. I did not know then that Samantha only stayed quiet when she was planning something. Looking back, the silence should have terrified me. The first sign that something was wrong with my health came as a quiet ache, the kind that settles into the body like it plans to stay. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was stress from work, long hours bent over design plans, or the aftermath of skipping too many proper meals. The discomfort felt sharp some days and dull on others, moving across my lower abdomen like a shadow that refused to sit still. I convinced myself it would pass. It did not. The pain grew over the following weeks, expanding into a constant throb that tightened my muscles and made me wake up at night drenched in sweat. One morning, I doubled over in the bathroom, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. Elena found me sitting on the floor, breathing in short, broken gasps. She insisted I go to the doctor that same day. I resisted at first more out of habit than logic, but she stayed firm. She drove me there herself. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and plastic. The nurse asked standard questions while typing my symptoms into her tablet. When the doctor came in, he pressed gently around my abdomen. Even that light pressure sent jolts of pain through me. He looked at me with a seriousness that made my stomach twist and said I needed imaging done. The ultrasound technician moved the wand across my abdomen and paused more times than I wanted her to. Her brows drew together and her eyes softened in a way that told me she saw something concerning long before she said anything. She excused herself to get the radiologist. I remember lying there on the table, staring at the ceiling tiles, tracing the tiny perforations in their surface. The room felt colder. When the doctor came back, he explained I had a significant ovarian cyst and signs of complications that needed surgical treatment. He said it carefully as if he did not want to alarm me, but the words surgery and complications echoed in my mind like they belonged to someone else. I nodded, even though my thoughts were scattered. The doctor scheduled me for a laparoscopic procedure the following week and warned me not to delay it. Elena squeezed my hand the entire ride home, but I felt numb, uncertain whether I was more afraid of the surgery or the thought that somehow, some way, Samantha might twist this into another accusation. I told my parents that evening. Mom's voice broke with worry. Dad promised to pray for me. They asked if they should fly out, but I told them Elena would help. I did not mention Samantha. I thought maybe keeping her out of it would keep me safe. I underestimated her ability to insert herself into anything involving me. 2 days later, Mom called again to check on me. I answered from my couch, curled under a blanket with a heating pad pressed against my stomach. The pain made it difficult to speak in full sentences. Mom asked for details about the cyst. I told her what I knew. When I paused, I heard another voice in the background. It was faint but familiar. Samantha asked if surgery was really necessary. Mom must have moved the phone closer to her because I could suddenly hear Samantha more clearly asking how long I had been sick, whether I was exaggerating, whether I had been dramatic about the pain. I froze. Mom tried to quiet her, but the damage was done. I hung up faster than I meant to. Elena sat beside me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but the truth pressed against my ribs like something heavy. I had not told Samantha. I had not wanted her involved. Yet she had already begun picking apart the edges of my reality again. The night before the surgery, sleep refused to come. I lay awake, counting the lines on the ceiling as my abdomen pulsed with a deep ache. Around 3 in the morning, I walked into the living room, sat down quietly, and tried to breathe through the fear rising in my chest. I stared out the window at the empty street below until the sky shifted from black to gray. Elena drove me to the hospital at dawn. The building was quiet except for the soft shuffle of nurses beginning their shifts. They checked me in, took my vitals, and led me to a curtained room where I changed into a thin gown. The air felt cold on my skin. A nurse placed an IV in my hand, and the anesthesiologist explained the procedure with a calm voice that helped steady my nerves. Elena stayed until they wheeled me down the hallway. She told me I would be okay, that she would be waiting the moment I woke up. When the anesthesia hit, it felt like falling through warm water. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in recovery with dry lips and a sharp ache radiating from my abdomen. The nurse told me the surgery had gone well. The cyst had been larger than expected, but the doctor removed it completely. I had 4 small incisions that were stitched and covered with clean bandages. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through me like a warning. The nurse pressed me gently back down and told me to rest. I drifted in and out of sleep for the next few hours. Elena brought me to the apartment later that evening. I moved slowly, each step careful. She helped me onto the couch and arranged pillows behind my back. I felt vulnerable in a way I had not felt since childhood, weak and unsure. My parents called that night. They sounded relieved that everything went smoothly. Samantha was quiet in the background again. Too quiet. I tried to tell myself that peace was possible, that maybe Samantha would stay out of this part of my life, that maybe distance still meant something. But even then, something inside me trembled. A feeling I could not shake. A feeling that warned me the pain I had just survived was nothing compared to the pain she would bring. Recovery was nothing like what the pamphlets promised. The brochures all showed smiling women in loose clothing sipping tea on soft couches and glowing with the peaceful gratitude of having survived something difficult. My reality looked nothing like that. My reality was slow steps from the couch to the bathroom breaths that felt too shallow and a soreness that carved through my abdomen every time I moved even an inch too far. The first few days blurred together in a haze of medication, restless naps, and the constant need to hold my stomach when I stood so the pain would not knock me over. Elena was a steady presence through all of it. She stopped by every morning before class and every evening after her shifts. She changed out water bottles, adjusted pillows, helped me sit upright when the pressure in my abdomen pulled too hard, and kept my medication schedule on her phone so I would not miss anything. Her thoughtfulness became the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I felt fragile in a way that made me uncomfortable. I hated asking for help, but had no choice. Even reaching for a glass of water made me wince. Showering became a slow ritual of trying to avoid soaking the bandages while bracing myself against the wall. Sitting up required both hands gripping the edge of the couch and a long exhale as the stitches pulled. I learned to walk using shorter strides, leaning slightly forward to avoid tugging the incisions. The pain was sharpest near the largest wound site. Every time I shifted my weight, it felt like someone was pressing a hot wire against my skin. The bandages stayed clean the first day, then tinted faintly with the pinkish marks the nurse had warned me were normal. I kept checking them, terrified of infection. Terrified of something going wrong, terrified of any reminder of vulnerability, because vulnerability had always been the easiest thing for Samantha to twist. I tried not to think about her, but she lingered in the back of my mind. The memory of her voice during Mom's phone call, the questions she asked, the tone she used, the years of history that followed me like a shadow even hundreds of miles away. I found myself looking at the apartment door more often than usual, checking the lock twice before Elena left for work. I knew it was irrational to think Samantha might appear out of nowhere. Or maybe it was not irrational at all. Maybe I had simply learned the hard way that ignoring her presence never made her disappear. The doctor instructed me to avoid exertion for at least 2 weeks. That meant no work, no long walks, no lifting anything heavier than a small bag of groceries. It also meant long hours trapped with my thoughts. I watched too many shows, dozed off mid-afternoon, reread the same messages from concerned coworkers, and tried to distract myself with design sketches that remained unfinished. My body felt like it was moving underwater. My emotions felt suspended somewhere between relief and exhaustion. The second night, a fever rose. It crept up slowly, making my skin feel clammy and hot. Elena checked my temperature and sat with me until it dropped back down, assuring me it was not unusual after surgery. Still, fear prickled under my skin each time the room seemed too warm or too cold. I texted my parents updates. Mom sent messages filled with concern. Dad sent short but supportive replies. Samantha did not text. She did not call. She did not acknowledge the surgery at all. A part of me hoped that meant she was indifferent that she had finally moved on. Another part sensed the quiet was too deliberate. On the fourth day, Elena had a long shift and left early in the morning. She set up everything I might need on the kitchen counter and promised to come back during her break. I watched her leave, listened to the door close, and felt a strange heaviness settle in my stomach. I tried to sleep, but my abdomen throbbed in a way that made it difficult to find a position that did not hurt. I ended up on the couch again, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. I must have drifted off for a bit because when I opened my eyes, the apartment felt dimmer, as if hours had passed. I reached for my water, sipped carefully, then slowly stood to use the bathroom. The movement made my stitches pull, and I paused halfway down the hall, pressing a hand to the largest incision. I breathed through the pain until it softened. When I returned to the couch, I felt slightly steadier, convinced the day would pass quietly. I had no idea how wrong I was. That afternoon became the doorway to everything that followed. It was the last stretch of calm before the fracture widened. It was the final moment where I still believed I was safe in my own home. Looking back now, every detail of that day feels like the slow tightening of a knot I did not know I was inside. The faint ache in my abdomen, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway outside, the lock on my door, solid and familiar, soon to become useless against what was already on its way. I rested my head back against the cushions, took another sip of water, and told myself the worst was behind me. I believed that lie because I needed to, because the truth was too unimaginable to consider, because I had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, Samantha would walk through my doorway without hesitation, carrying the same certainty she used every time she dismantled something in my life, and holding in her hand the same casual cruelty she had sharpened since childhood. The day Samantha showed up began like every other day in my recovery, slow and heavy with pain that pulsed through my abdomen each time I shifted my weight. Elena had left early for work, reminding me twice to keep my phone nearby in case I needed anything. She placed a bottle of water on the table, arranged my medication in a neat row, and checked the bandages once more before heading out the door. When the apartment fell quiet, I let myself believe I could manage the rest of the day alone. I tried watching a show but could not focus. I drifted into shallow sleep, woke up sweating, fumbled for the remote, and dozed again. The hours stretched the thin winter light moving slowly across the living room floor. By early afternoon, I had gathered enough energy to shuffle to the kitchen and pour myself a glass of ginger ale. The carbonation stung my throat, but it eased the nausea that had been growing throughout the morning. I leaned against the counter and waited for the dizziness to pass. That was when I heard the first knock. It was soft, almost hesitant. I frowned. No one ever knocked that softly in this building. Delivery drivers knocked hard. Elena used her key. My neighbors usually knocked with the urgency of people who needed to borrow something. This knock sounded different. I shuffled back to the couch, sat down carefully, and waited. A second knock followed firmer this time, as though whoever stood outside had made up their mind. I hesitated before pushing myself back up. My incision tugged painfully when I stood, and I breathed through the ache as I walked to the door. I peered through the peephole. My blood turned cold. Samantha stood in the hallway, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. A bag hung from her shoulder. She looked like she had been standing there long enough to know I was home. My heart thudded loudly in my ears. I wanted to pretend I was not there. I wanted to step away and call Elena. But something in Samantha's posture told me she would not leave, not without forcing her way in. I unlocked the door, slowly opening it only a few inches. Samantha took this as an invitation and stepped forward, pressing her palm against the door and pushing it open wider without waiting for my permission. Her eyes scanned my face first, then trailed down to the outline of the bandages beneath my loose shirt. She took in the pallor of my skin, the faint tremor in my hands, the exhaustion in my voice when I said her name. Samantha entered the apartment with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged anywhere she decided to be. She stopped in the center of the living room and turned to face me. "You look worse than Mom said." Her tone carried no concern, only suspicion. I gripped the edge of the door to steady myself. "What are you doing here?" Samantha shrugged as if the question were silly. "Checking on you, making sure you're not lying." My mouth went dry. "I told Mom not to tell you I had surgery." Samantha smirked. "She did anyway. She was worried. Or maybe she just thought I should know." She set her bag down on the floor, unzipped it, and began rummaging through it without explaining why she was here or what she wanted. I watched her with a growing sense of dread. Something about the way she moved felt too deliberate, too controlled. She pulled out a notebook, flipped through a few pages, then snapped it shut again. She set it on my coffee table like she owned the space. I forced myself to inhale slowly. "Samantha, I am recovering. I do not have the energy for whatever this is." She looked up sharply. "Whatever this is? You mean the truth? You mean making sure you're not faking another medical crisis for attention?" Her words hit me with the familiar sting of old wounds. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. "I am not faking anything. I had surgery. It was documented." "You can talk to the doctor if you need." She cut me off with a scoff. "Please, you have been pulling this kind of thing since we were kids." Every sniffle became the flu. Every bruise turned into a tragedy. "You like it when people worry about you." I felt my legs weaken. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Samantha stepped closer. "You probably exaggerated your symptoms. Or convinced some doctor you needed surgery when you did not. Maybe you even asked them for the smallest incisions possible so you could dramatize it." I backed away until my calves hit the couch. My hand instinctively covered my abdomen. She watched the movement closely, her eyes narrowing like a hunter studying the weakness in its prey. "You look scared," she said, almost pleased. "If it is real, why are you scared of me seeing it?" "Because you should not be here," I whispered. "Because you are not here to help." Samantha's expression hardened. "I am here to get the truth, and I am not leaving until I do." She reached for the hem of my shirt. I jerked away, wincing as the movement tugged painfully at my stitches. Samantha stared at me with a smug smile, as if my flinch confirmed everything she wanted to believe. "Let me see it." "No." Her eyes flashed with something sharp and unyielding. "You really want me to believe you? Fine. Show me the incisions. Show me the stitches. Show me something real." I swallowed hard. My heart pounded against my ribs. Samantha's gaze locked onto me like she was piecing together a puzzle only she understood. I could feel the shift in the air, the moment where her suspicions solidified into intention. And standing there in my living room, still weak from anesthesia and pain, I suddenly understood that Samantha had not come to check on me. She had come to expose me, prove me wrong, catch me in a lie she had written long before this moment. I felt fear rise in my chest with the slow inevitability of a tide pulling me under. I should have called for help. I should have locked the door. I should have trusted the instinct that prickled inside me every time Samantha's voice filled the background of a phone call. But it was too late. She was already here, and she had never once left without leaving something broken behind. The moment Samantha reached for me, something inside my chest tightened so sharply I almost forgot how to breathe. She moved without hesitation, her fingers stretching toward the hem of my shirt, as if she had every right to touch what did not belong to her. I stepped back instinctively, clutching my abdomen, but the movement sent a sharp bolt of pain tearing through my stitches. I gasped and steadied myself against the couch, my knees threatening to buckle. Samantha watched me with an expression that made my skin crawl. It was not concern, it was calculation. She tilted her head and spoke in a tone so casual it felt sinister. You cannot hide behind that forever. If it is real, then show me. Otherwise, I am right. You are lying. I shook my head, unable to find my voice for a brief moment. My throat felt tight, my pulse pounding against it like a warning. Samantha took another step toward me, closing the distance in a way that made me feel cornered. I lifted my hand slightly to signal her to stop, but she ignored it. Instead, she looked past me toward the kitchen, and something in her eyes shifted. A spark of decision, a plan forming in real time. I knew that look. I had seen it when she wanted to twist a story when she needed evidence to match her narrative. She brushed past me, walking into the kitchen like she owned the apartment. My heart lurched. The ache in my abdomen became a tight, throbbing pulse as I followed her with my gaze but could not move fast enough. She opened drawers one by one, movements precise and unhurried, as though she had been preparing for this moment. When she reached the utensil drawer, my breath caught in my throat. She pulled out the small fruit knife I used for peeling apples. It was nothing special, dull around the edges from years of use with a plastic handle and a blade that gleamed slightly under the kitchen light. But in her hand, at that moment, it became something else entirely. She held it loosely at first, letting the blade sway slightly as she turned back toward me. I could not stop the instinctive step I took backward. Pain shot through me again, sharper this time, making me grab my side. Samantha's lips curled into a faint smile. A smile that told me she believed she was proving something. "You want to know why no one believes you," she said softly. "Because the truth always shows. And right now, you are terrified of me seeing yours." I shook my head, my voice strained. "Samantha, do not. This is not a joke. This is not some argument. I just had surgery. You need to stop." She approached slowly like she was afraid of startling me, but her grip on the knife tightened. The blade angled upward just enough to catch the light. She stopped in front of me too close, her breath brushing my face. "Lift your shirt," she said, her voice flat. "No." My voice cracked with the effort. I pressed my hand harder against my abdomen. Samantha lifted her free hand, fingers brushing the fabric of my shirt. When I stepped away again, she grabbed the edge with a sudden jerk. Pain shot through me as the pull shifted my weight. Samantha leaned forward, her eyes locked onto the bandages beneath the fabric. "So you do have them," she murmured, "though who knows if they are real." She dropped the knife to her side and reached for the largest bandage. I grabbed her wrist with my free hand, but the strength behind her movement caught me off guard. She tore the bandage free in a single pull. The adhesive ripped across my already tender skin. I cried out, the sound raw and high in my throat. The cool air hit the exposed incision, making it burn. Samantha dropped the used bandage on the floor like it disgusted her. She leaned closer to examine the stitches, the fresh surgical line that still looked angry and pink against my skin. "Makeup," she muttered. "Glue. Something fake." I tried to twist away, but her hand shot out and pressed firmly against my side right above the incision. The pressure made stars explode behind my eyelids. I gasped and grabbed her wrist again, but she pushed harder. Her tone sharpened. "Hold still. You always hide." "Not today." Then she lifted the knife. For a split second, I thought she would stab me, but she did not angle it like a weapon. She angled it like a tool. The dull side of the blade pressed against the row of stitches. My breath seized. Samantha dragged the edge of the knife gently along the line, tracing the shape of the wound. The sensation was terrifying. She was not cutting deep. Not yet. She was testing, watching, measuring my reaction. I felt the blade snag the first stitch. It tugged. I let out a panicked sound, half scream, half plea. Samantha's eyes flickered with something like triumph. "See? You always exaggerate." That did not even hurt that badly. I reached for her arm, but she yanked the knife upward just enough to catch the stitch again. The pressure increased. The thread snapped. A sharp, burning pain shot through me as the incision pulled open slightly. I cried out, collapsing to one knee. Heat bloomed across my skin. Samantha leaned over me, gripping my shoulder to keep me still. She pressed the knife down once more, dragging it lightly across the exposed skin. The bandage around the incision grew wet. A small circle of red spread, darkening quickly. Samantha stepped back, her breath unsteady, staring at the blood staining the gauze. She pointed at me with the knife. She did that herself. I did not touch her. She is faking. She wants attention. Her voice escalated in pitch as if practicing a defense for an audience only she could see. I pressed my hand against the wound, feeling the warmth through the gauze. My pulse throbbed under my palm. The pain radiated through my abdomen in sharp waves. Samantha's breathing grew faster and she dropped the knife onto the couch cushion beside me. It bounced once the blade glinting under the light. She backed away with her hands in the air, her voice rising. She is hurting herself. She is making a scene. She always does this. She is manipulating everyone. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. Pain clawed at my ribs. I could feel myself tipping sideways. I hit the floor with a soft thud, the world spinning around me. Samantha's words grew louder. She is staging this. She is lying. She is always lying. The room blurred and brightened. My ears rang. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. Samantha paced in front of me, her voice sharp and frantic. Blood dripped from the corner of the gauze speckling the floor. The last thing I saw was her staring down at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Not with horror, not with regret, with certainty. Certainty that she had done nothing wrong. Certainty that the truth was whatever she said it was. Certainty that she had finally proven her point. Then the room tilted and everything faded into a tunnel of cold, narrowing silence. The world came back to me in fragments like pieces of a photograph drifting onto a blank page one corner at a time. The first thing I felt was the cold floor against my cheek. The second was the pounding in my abdomen, a deep and rhythmic pain that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I could not move at first. My body felt heavy as though someone had draped a thick layer of wet sand over me. Voices filtered in through the fog. Not Samantha's. A different voice, sharper, urgent. Grace, Grace, can you hear me? A hand touched my shoulder. I flinched, instinctively gasping before the voice spoke again, softer now. It is me, Elena. You are okay. I am here. The relief that followed hit me so fast it made my eyes water. I tried to speak, but a strangled sound escaped instead. Elena knelt beside me and carefully moved my hand away from my abdomen to check the bleeding. Her breath caught. Oh, my God, who did this? What happened? I could not answer. My throat felt tight, my thoughts scattered. I saw her look around the room, eyes landing on the fruit knife lying on the couch cushion and the torn bandage on the floor. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror so quickly it made my stomach twist. She looked toward the hallway just in time to see Samantha near the door, pacing like an animal in a cage. Samantha's voice rose in a frantic rush. She is lying. She hurt herself. She always does this. I did not touch her. She is trying to make me look bad. Elena stared at her with a look I had never seen on her face before, a look that was all sharp edges and disbelief. Get out! Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Samantha froze. I said, get out. Now. Her tone was stronger than I had ever heard it. Samantha stepped back, offended more than intimidated. She pointed toward me on the floor and said loudly, She did that herself. She wants attention. She is manipulating you. Elena moved between us. Her back straightened, her shoulders squared. Do not take another step toward her. Samantha's jaw tightened, but she did not move forward. Elena grabbed her phone and dropped to her knees again. She pressed her free hand firmly against my side to slow the bleeding and dialed 911 with the other. Her voice steadied as she spoke to the dispatcher. We need an ambulance immediately. My friend just had abdominal surgery. Her stitches have been cut. She is bleeding. She can barely stay conscious. Yes, the address is... She rattled it off quickly, glancing down at me every few seconds, as if checking whether I was still with her. The dispatcher asked questions. Elena answered them in clipped, focused sentences. She was a nursing student. She had seen emergencies before. But this was different. This was personal. She hung up and looked at me again. Stay with me, Grace. Do not drift off. Stay awake. I tried. I really did. But the pain was overwhelming. The room tilted like a boat caught in a rough current. My breath hitched and shortened. Elena squeezed my hand. Listen to me. Help is coming. They are on their way. You are not alone. Samantha hovered near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Her expression flickered between agitation, defensiveness, and a strange kind of blankness. The hallway light cast a long shadow behind her, stretching across the floor, like something reaching for me. Elena turned on her again. What is wrong with you? Her voice shook with rage. What did you do to her? Samantha shook her head vigorously. I did nothing. She cut herself. She staged it. She wanted you to walk in and see this. She even dropped the knife to make it look like I did something. Elena. Lena stared at her in disbelief. You seriously think anyone will believe that? There is blood on her bandages. Fresh blood. The stitches are torn. Samantha's voice rose in pitch. She is crazy. She has always been crazy. She used to pretend to be sick all the time. She has problems. She wants attention. Elena's voice dropped to a low, dangerous quiet. You need to leave before the paramedics get here. Samantha opened her mouth to argue, but the distant echo of sirens silenced her. The sound grew louder, winding its way down the street. In that moment, Samantha's face shifted, not to guilt, not to fear, but to calculation. She looked at me one last time, her expression unreadable, then turned and slipped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her. Elena exhaled shakily and pressed her palm against the wound again, applying more pressure. She brushed the hair back from my forehead and tried to smile, but her eyes shone with panic. It is okay. You are going to be okay. I am right here. The sirens cut off abruptly. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. A firm knock sounded on the door before the paramedics entered without waiting for permission. The room filled with movement and voices, quick commands, and medical terminology. Elena stepped aside only enough to give them space, her eyes never leaving me. One paramedic knelt next to me and assessed the bleeding, asking questions I heard only as muffled echoes. Another checked my vitals, reading off numbers I could not understand. They lifted me onto a stretcher with careful hands. The ceiling lights blurred above me as they wheeled me toward the door. Elena walked beside me, gripping the railing, her voice steady and sure. I am coming with you. I am not leaving you alone. As they carried me toward the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of the hallway. Samantha was nowhere in sight, just the fading sound of her footsteps somewhere far away. The farther I was taken from that apartment, the lighter the air felt. Not pain-free, not safe, but away from her. Away from the person who had held a knife to my stitches and convinced herself it was the truth. The ambulance ride felt like traveling through a tunnel made of noise and light, everything blurring together except the pain that pulsed steadily in my abdomen. The paramedic beside me kept asking questions, but my answers came out slurred or incomplete. I remember the cool gel of the portable ultrasound, the steady beep of the monitor, and Elena's voice somewhere near my head telling me to stay awake. I tried. I really did. But consciousness slipped in and out like waves washing over sand. When we arrived at the hospital, the brightness of the emergency room overwhelmed me. Nurses swarmed around the stretcher, adjusting equipment, removing the blood-soaked gauze, replacing it with fresh pads that filled with red far too quickly. A doctor appeared at my side, introducing herself as Dr. Henderson, her voice professional but lined with urgency. She examined the wound, her eyes narrowing at the torn stitches. She pressed gently around the area, and even that minimal pressure made a pained cry escape my throat. She asked Elena what had happened. Elena's voice shook as she explained everything she saw. Dr. Henderson looked at the torn bandages again and let out a quiet breath that sounded like anger held under control. These stitches were cut, she said firmly. Not torn naturally, not popped from movement. Cut. I felt a chill even under the heated blankets they had placed over me. Hearing someone else say it out loud made the reality sharper, more undeniable. Dr. Henderson ordered immediate imaging and blood work. They wheeled me down a hallway where fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The MRI technician helped me onto the machine's cold table, sliding me inside the narrow tube as the machine hummed loudly. I stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the knife, about the look in Samantha's eyes, about the moment the stitch snapped. The scan felt endless. When it finally finished, they guided me back to a room where Elena sat waiting, wringing her hands until her knuckles turned white. She stood as soon as she saw me stepping forward to take my hand. "You are safe," she whispered. I nodded weakly, but safe felt like a foreign word. After an hour, Dr. Henderson returned with my results. Her expression told me everything before she even spoke. "You are lucky," she said. "The stitch that was cut caused the incision to pull open, but you do not have internal bleeding. There is some separation of the tissue below the wound, so we will need to repair it, but we can do it tonight." Relief and fear crashed together inside my chest. She continued, her tone turning firmer. This was not caused by accidental contact. This was not from bending or lifting incorrectly. This was a straight cut across the top of the stitch line. "Someone used a blade on you." I swallowed hard, tears slipping out before I could stop them. Elena looked at the doctor with disbelief. "She did that to her. My friend would never cut herself open." "Someone did this. Someone hurt her." Dr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Then we need to report it. This is assault, and because it involves recent surgical wounds, it also counts as medical tampering." The phrase medical tampering sounded surreal, like something out of a crime documentary rather than my actual life. But the seriousness in Dr. Henderson's tone left no room for interpretation. She stepped out to make the report. Elena stayed with me, brushing the hair away from my face and holding my hand tightly. I felt a deep ache beneath my ribs that went beyond physical pain. It was the grief of realizing something irreversible. Samantha had crossed a line she could never uncross. When the police officer arrived, he spoke gently, asking for details. I tried to explain everything, but the words tangled in my throat. Elena filled in what I could not, describing exactly how she found me the knife on the couch, and Samantha yelling that I had done it to myself. The officer wrote everything down, occasionally glancing at my side where fresh bandages were taped firmly in place. He asked if I had any reason to believe Samantha would hurt me. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Years of reasons. Most I never said out loud until now. He took notes, his expression tightening. When he asked if Samantha had a history of violence, manipulation, or unstable behavior, something hollow opened in my chest. I told him she had been doing things like this my entire life. Not with knives, not with blood, but with lies, with bruises disguised as accidents, with stories twisted into weapons, with gaslighting so precise it felt like she rehearsed it. The officer nodded as if recognizing a pattern he had seen before. "We will need to locate her tonight. She needs to be questioned. She may be arrested depending on what we find." Hearing the word arrested made my body tense. I felt guilt slide in uninvited and irrational. Elena placed her hand on my arm. "You did nothing wrong. She did this. Not you." The repair procedure happened late that night. The anesthesiologist placed a mask over my face, and the world slipped into darkness again. When I woke up, the pain was deeper but cleaner, no longer jagged and raw. Dr. Henderson came in and explained that the cut would have caused a serious infection within a day or two if I had not been brought in. She made it clear. Whoever did this put your health in real danger. This was intentional harm. I nodded, tears filling my eyes again. She reached out and squeezed my shoulder gently. "You survived something you should never have had to experience." Once she left, Elena pulled her chair closer to the bed and settled in. I closed my eyes, breathing carefully, and for the first time since Samantha stepped into my apartment, I felt a thin, fragile thread of safety. Not because the pain was gone, not because the nightmare was over, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light, and there was no going back into the darkness Samantha tried to trap me in. The investigation began before dawn, long before the pain medication from surgery wore off. I woke to the muted sound of voices in the hallway outside my hospital room, whispers layered with urgency. Elena sat in a chair near my bed, chin tilted forward, asleep but ready to wake at the slightest noise. When the door opened, a different officer entered the room from the one who had taken my statement the night before. He introduced himself as Detective Miller, his voice firm but calm, the kind that carried weight without needing force. He pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed, his notebook already open. "I want to go over your statement again," he said. "Not because we doubt you, but because we already have leads developing and I need clarity." The way he said leads made something cold settle between my ribs. I nodded, adjusting slightly against the pillows as pain radiated from my abdomen. He asked me to walk him through the events again. I told him everything I remembered: Samantha arriving, her suspicion, her insistence I show her the stitches, her grabbing the bandage, the knife, the pressure, the pain, and the moment the stitch snapped. He wrote quickly, only stopping occasionally to ask for a detail or confirm timing. When he finished, he closed his notebook but did not immediately stand. "There is something else we need to discuss," he said. "Something we found tonight." My stomach tightened. He continued. "We located your sister at a gas station about 40 minutes from your apartment. She left before the ambulance arrived, but a witness saw her leaving your building in a hurry. She matched the description and confirmed Samantha seemed agitated." My breath hitched. Detective Miller went on. "When officers approached her vehicle, she was alone. She cooperated at first. Then things shifted. She said some unusual things that raised concerns. Unusual how I asked quietly." He hesitated, choosing his words. "She claimed she saved your life, then claimed you staged the entire incident, then said you attacked her, then said she had no sister." The last part hit me like a blow. Elena stirred at the sound and woke, leaning forward, listening. The detective continued. "Her story changed several times within minutes. Due to the nature of the incident, they brought her in for questioning, and there is more." My chest tightened. I was afraid to ask, but needed to. "What else?" He exhaled slowly. "During the interview, she accidentally revealed she had accessed your medical information ahead of the surgery. That caught my attention immediately." He nodded. "She works at a healthcare billing company. She claimed she saw suspicious things in your records. She said she was watching out for you." My pulse hammered. "Did she have permission?" He shook his head. "Not even close. Her employer confirmed that accessing your file was a violation. They pulled her logs." The detective set his notebook on his knee. "You need to hear this. She did not just look at your file once. She accessed it 16 times over the past 2 months. 16. The room seemed to tilt. My breath came short and shaky. He continued, "And she did not stop with you. She accessed the files of several other individuals, patients she suspected were lying about illnesses. It was not random. There was a pattern. The more he spoke, the clearer the picture became. This was not an isolated incident. This was an escalation." He took out a page containing printed timestamps. Every access attempt, every login, every record she viewed. Each date felt like a small cut across my skin. Where was I those days? What had I been doing? Studying, working, sleeping, walking, living my life completely unaware my sister was combing through my medical history, like a detective searching for clues to a crime I never committed. I felt a wave of nausea rise. Detective Miller continued, his voice steadier than mine could ever be. "Her employer has already suspended her. They contacted legal counsel. This is serious. There will likely be federal consequences for the medical privacy violations alone. But that is only the beginning." He leaned slightly forward in his chair. "We conducted a preliminary background check. We found something else, something from your past." I felt the room shrink around me. He reached into a folder and pulled out a copy of a very old medical report. The paper was faded, scanned years ago, the text slightly blurred. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at. Then everything in my body went cold. It was a record from when Samantha and I were teenagers, a visit to urgent care. The report indicated Samantha had a deep scratch along her left forearm. The injury was described as self-inflicted, but reported as an assault by a sibling. My sibling. Me. I blinked hard, hoping I misread it. I remembered that day. The bracelet, the accusation, the scrape, the planted evidence, but I had never known she actually went to urgent care. Detective Miller tapped the page gently. The attending physician noted inconsistencies in the story she gave. He stated it seemed self-inflicted but was compelled to report what she claimed. This was before mandatory psychological evaluations were common in such cases. My throat closed. He flipped the page. When we interviewed that physician tonight, he remembered Samantha. He remembered her certainty. He remembered her anger. He remembered the way she insisted you pushed her even though the injury did not match that mechanism. He pressed his lips together. Your sister has a documented history of creating false medical narratives. The room felt colder. I pulled the hospital blanket tighter around myself even though it did nothing to warm the chill spreading through my bones. He continued. We also discovered something else. During interviews with her coworkers tonight, a few mentioned behavior that raised red flags. She spent lunch breaks researching medical conditions. She argued with patients over their symptoms. She told people she could spot a liar from a mile away. This is not the first time she has tried to expose someone she believed was faking an illness. A cold dread crept over me. The detective paused before delivering the final blow. One coworker described hearing her say she believed you were dangerous to yourself and others, that she needed to protect people from you. Protect them! From me! A bitter laugh rose in my throat, small and shaky. He nodded solemnly. She seems to genuinely believe her own narrative. He closed the folder. This is no longer just sibling conflict or jealousy. This is a pattern of obsession, stalking, medical tampering, false reporting, and now assault, serious assault. He leaned forward slightly. You have been living inside her delusion for years. The words hit something deep inside me, something I had kept buried beneath rationalization and denial, something I had never dared admit. He said quietly, You survived her, but she is not the same girl you grew up with, and she is not well. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I realized I was crying. Elena slipped her hand into mine and squeezed gently. The detective's voice softened. We have enough evidence to move forward with felony charges: assault with a weapon, medical tampering, stalking, unauthorized access to private medical records. And depending on what the federal investigators decide, possibly identity and privacy crimes beyond our jurisdiction. I swallowed hard. It felt like the deepest breath of my life. He added one more thing. Something we discovered from the apartment building. The neighbor across from you showed us his doorbell camera. It captured your sister entering your apartment right behind the delivery driver. It also recorded her leaving around the time the ambulance arrived. But the most important part is this. He took out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. The video showed Samantha knocking, then pushing her way inside, her posture tense, her expression determined. And then, just before she closed the door behind her, the knife she had tucked into her sleeve gleamed for a single, unmistakable second. My stomach twisted so violently I had to close my eyes. Detective Miller lowered the phone. This is not about misunderstanding or concern. This was premeditated, planned. She came there to catch you in something, or to force something she could frame as truth. He stood slowly. She is under arrest, and this time she will not walk away with a warning. I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling through a veil of tears. It was not just the pain or the shock. It was the realization that the story I had been telling myself for years was wrong. Samantha had not changed. She had escalated, and I had barely escaped the moment she decided her delusion mattered more than my life. News of Samantha's arrest spread through my family faster than I expected, carried by late-night calls, frantic messages, and the kind of disbelief that bends reality before accepting it. I woke the next morning to my phone vibrating non-stop on the bedside table. Elena glanced at the screen before handing it to me. It was my mother, and then my father, and then my aunt, and then my cousins. Dozens of missed calls, dozens of voicemails. I stared at the list with a strange sense of distance, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel instead of my own. When I finally gathered the strength to call my parents, my mother answered before the first ring finished. Her voice was trembling, breathy, laced with panic. Grace, tell me, this is a misunderstanding. Please tell me they got it wrong. My throat tightened. Mom. They did not. I heard her inhale sharply. I could picture her clutching the kitchen counter the way she did whenever her world tilted. Your sister is in custody, she whispered. She said she did not hurt you. She said you did it to yourself. She said she was trying to help you because you were spiraling. The words hit with a dull thud. They were familiar. They were the same phrases Samantha had repeated for years in different forms. I closed my eyes. She cut my stitches, Mom. She came into my home. She grabbed a knife from my kitchen and cut the stitches. She did that. Not me. Silence filled the line before my father's voice replaced hers, deeper and steadier but strained at the edges. We saw the report, he said. And the video. The neighbor's footage. I waited, bracing myself. He exhaled slowly. She went there with the knife. His voice cracked. My heart sank at the sound. I had never heard my father break like that. Not once. Not when he lost his job years ago. Not when his brother passed unexpectedly. Not during any hardship our family had faced. But now, talking about Samantha, he sounded fragile. You could have died, he whispered. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I know. Mom came back on the line. Her voice was different now. Shaken. Wounded. She sounded like someone caught between two worlds she did not know how to choose between. I do not understand, she said. Her words tumbled out in a rush. Samantha has always struggled, but she would never hurt you. Not like that. Not with a knife. Not intentionally. She loves you. I forced myself to breathe. No, Mom, she does not. She loves control. She loves being right. She loves whatever version of reality makes sense to her. But she does not love me. Not in a way that keeps me safe. Mom tried to protest, but her voice cracked mid-sentence. I could hear the denial collapsing. She had spent years dismissing Samantha's actions as moodiness, jealousy, or misunderstandings. But a knife cut through every excuse. My father spoke again. We will fly out tomorrow. We want to see you. I nodded, even though they could not see me. Okay. He hesitated. This is not your fault. None of this. Even hearing him say it, guilt still pulsed under my skin. After I hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Elena sat beside me, silent but present. The truth was settling in slowly. My parents believed me. But they also loved Samantha, and love complicates everything. As the day passed, the rest of my family began weighing in. My Aunt Judith left a voicemail filled with indignation. You are tearing this family apart, she snapped. Sisters fight. This was taken out of context. Samantha would never hurt you on purpose. She was worried. She was trying to see if you were okay. You should have handled this privately. I deleted the message halfway through, my chest tightening. Another cousin texted me. Are you sure you did not overreact? My stomach rolled. Overreact. A word I had heard my entire life. A word Samantha once weaponized so effectively that even now, lying in a hospital bed with a freshly repaired surgical wound, someone could aim it at me without hesitation. But then there were messages I did not expect. My cousin Rachel wrote, I believe you. I always noticed something off with Samantha. The things she said about you never made sense. I am sorry you went through this. A family friend sent another message. Your sister needs help. Serious help. What she did was not normal, not excusable, not defendable. My phone buzzed nonstop, a gallery of opinions that painted my family into two clear sides. Those who saw Samantha for who she was, and those who refused to let go of the illusion they built around her. When my parents arrived the next afternoon, they looked older than I remembered. My father hugged me first carefully, as though he feared I might break. My mother hesitated before embracing me, her eyes glassy with guilt and confusion. She kissed my forehead and whispered, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not see it sooner. The apology cracked something inside me. I leaned into her shoulder and cried quietly, the grief stretching back through years of doubt, pain, and dismissal. But the moment of connection was brief. As soon as we sat down, my mother asked the question I had been dreading. Do you want us to visit Samantha? She needs us. I stared at her. My voice came out thin. She cut my stitches. Cut them. My mother flinched. I know, sweetheart. I know. Her hands trembled on her lap. But she is not well. She is sick. She needs help. I clenched my jaw. So do I. The room fell silent. My father cleared his throat. Your mother is not choosing sides. She is trying to understand what she missed. My mother nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I never thought she was dangerous. I never imagined she would do something like this. I rubbed my hands together, staring at the bandages on my stomach. That is the problem. No one imagined it. No one wanted to see it, even when the signs were there. Even when I begged for space. Even when she blamed me for everything. No one wanted to admit she was hurting me. My mother broke completely. She covered her face and sobbed. My father wrapped his arm around her, his own expression crumpling. Watching them hurt felt like another wound opening inside me. I loved them. I had always loved them. But love had not protected me. Love had blinded them, and now we were all bleeding from the same truth. The rest of the visit was quiet, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. When they finally left that night, I lay back against the pillows and stared at the window. The sky outside was ink black. The reflection in the glass showed a tired woman with dark circles under her eyes and pain etched into her expression. I realized then that my family would never be the same. Samantha had broken something that could not be fixed, a fracture so deep it spread across generations, and none of us would ever walk the same way again. The courthouse felt colder than any hospital room I had been placed in, its marble floors echoing with hurried footsteps and hushed conversations that hovered in the air like a dull hum. Elena walked beside me, steady and unwavering, while my parents followed a few steps behind, the distance symbolizing the fracture none of us knew how to cross. I wore loose, soft clothing the hospital had recommended during my continued recovery, and every step sent a subtle reminder of the wound Samantha had torn open. When the courtroom doors came into view, my heart began to hammer so loudly I could feel each beat in my throat. Inside, the gallery was already filled. Family members, friends, people I did not recognize. Even a few local reporters sat along the far wall with notepads ready. Cases involving medical tampering and assault tended to attract attention, the detective had explained. People wanted to know how something so unthinkable could happen between sisters. When Samantha was escorted into the room, a ripple passed through the gallery. She looked smaller than I remembered, her wrists bound in soft restraints. Her expression twisted with a mixture of defiance and fear. Her hair was unkempt, her gaze sweeping the courtroom until it landed on me. Her eyes widened, and for a brief second her face softened, as if she were seeing her little sister again instead of the perceived liar she had constructed in her mind. Then her expression shifted sharply into a sneer. She mouthed something I could not hear. Elena squeezed my arm. "Do not look at her. You do not have to take that in." I nodded and focused forward. The judge entered, a stern woman with silver hair tied into a tight bun, her eyes sharp enough to slice air. Everyone rose, then sat again. The prosecutor began by laying out the charges: clearly aggravated assault with a weapon, medical tampering, unauthorized access to private medical records, ongoing harassment, and stalking. Each charge felt like a stone dropped into a deep well, heavy and echoing. Samantha's attorney, a man who looked like he had aged 10 years during the pretrial hearings, stood and tried to counter. He argued Samantha's actions were driven by concern, by misguided fear, by a belief that I was harming myself. He tiptoed around the words mental instability, though the implications saturated every defense he offered. The judge's gaze barely flickered. The first witness called was Dr. Henderson. She walked confidently to the stand, her posture immaculate. She explained the nature of my surgery, the fragility of the stitches, and how dangerous it was for them to be cut prematurely. She described the incision, the angle of the cut, the pattern, the depth. Then, with a steady voice that carried the weight of truth, she said, "This wound was cut intentionally. There is no medical scenario in which this would occur accidentally." The courtroom murmured. Samantha's jaw tightened. Her attorney attempted to poke holes in the testimony, but Dr. Henderson's responses were precise and calm. It was clear she was not a doctor who minced words. The prosecutor presented photographs next. Images of the wound before and after surgery, the torn stitches, the reopened incision. Even from across the room, I felt the old pain flicker in my abdomen. The judge studied each image, her brow tightening slightly. Then came the digital evidence. audit logs from Samantha's workplace showing her multiple unauthorized accesses, security footage from the building lobby, clips from the neighbor's doorbell camera showing Samantha slipping into my apartment behind the delivery driver, zoomed stills showing the knife handle peeking out from her sleeve. Samantha's attorney objected repeatedly. He claimed the video was grainy. He claimed the logs were unclear. He claimed she had forgotten to log out of her workstation, but the prosecutor dismantled each objection methodically. The evidence was too extensive, too interconnected, too damning. Then it was time for testimony from Samantha's co-workers. A woman named Teresa took the stand first. She looked nervous, but her voice gained confidence as she described Samantha's behavior. She spent every lunch break searching for medical cases. She thought everyone lied about illnesses. She confronted patients about symptoms they reported as if she were a doctor. She was obsessed with catching people. She said she could expose them all. Another coworker testified that Samantha had spoken about me specifically. She said you were dangerous. She said you were faking something huge. She said she needed to stop you before you fooled anyone else. I stared at my lap, pressing my fingertips together, forcing my breath to stay steady. Listening to strangers recount how my sister had described me felt like peeling back skin to expose nerves. Then it was my turn. The prosecutor walked me to the stand, helped me sit, and reminded me to breathe. He began gently. "Grace, please tell the court what happened that day." I swallowed hard and began describing everything. How Samantha arrived unexpectedly, how she barged in, how her eyes were cold and sharp, how she accused me of lying, how she grabbed the knife, how she cut the stitches, how the pain felt like fire under my skin. At one point, my voice cracked. The judge asked if I needed a moment, but I shook my head. I had spent my entire life being talked over, dismissed, and doubted. I would not let this story be told by anyone but me. When the prosecutor finished, Samantha's attorney stood. His tone softened, almost patronizing. "Grace," he said slowly, "is it possible you misinterpreted your sister's intentions?" "No." "Could the stitches have torn when she tried to inspect them?" "No." "Could she have believed she was helping you?" "No." He paused before asking the question I knew was coming. "Has your sister ever hurt you before?" I looked directly at him. "You do not suddenly decide to cut someone's stitches for the first time." The gallery reacted with a low exhale. He shifted uncomfortably. No further questions. As I stepped down, my legs trembled. Elena reached out subtly to steady me as I returned to my seat. Then Samantha was called to the stand. Her attorney had insisted she testify, convinced she could present herself as concerned, confused, misunderstood. But the moment she sat down, it became clear her version of reality was not anchored to the one the rest of us lived in. She started by claiming she saw me harming myself. Then she contradicted herself by saying she thought I had no real surgery. Minutes later, she said she saw the doctor fake my incision. Then she claimed she never touched the knife. The prosecutor let her speak each inconsistency, adding weight to the truth. And then came the moment that broke whatever thin defense remained. Samantha leaned forward, staring directly at me, her voice rising. "You wanted this. You needed people looking at you. You always did. You faked everything your whole life. I only exposed you." The gallery gasped. The judge's expression hardened like stone. The prosecutor stood. No further questions. Samantha's attorney buried his face in his hands. Closing arguments began. The prosecutor delivered a powerful statement about intent evidence and the years of escalating behavior that led to the attack. The defense tried desperately to reframe it as misunderstanding mental health confusion, but the jury was already watching Samantha with a mixture of fear and pity. It took them less than an hour to return. Guilty. On all counts. Samantha inhaled sharply as if she had been struck. Her composure crumbled instantly. She sobbed loudly, reaching toward my parents. They cried too torn in ways I could never mend. The judge delivered the sentence in a firm voice. 4 years in state prison, 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, 0 contact with me for the duration of her sentence and beyond unless approved by the court. Samantha screamed as the bailiffs took her away, her cries echoing off the cold walls of the courtroom. The sound followed me long after she disappeared behind the heavy doors. When the judge dismissed the room, I remained seated for a moment, clutching the edge of the bench. Elena placed a hand on my shoulder. "It is over," she whispered. But in my chest, the truth settled with gravity. No, it was not over. Not really. But for the first time in my life, I was free. In the days following the sentencing, life felt strangely quiet, as though someone had lowered the volume on the entire world, but left the emotions inside me turned up too loud. The courthouse echoes faded, but the weight of everything that happened did not vanish with them. It lingered thick and invisible, filling the spaces between breaths. Elena drove me back to my apartment, insisting she stay with me for a few nights until I felt secure. Even with her beside me, stepping into my home felt like forcing myself into a room where a nightmare had unfolded in real time. The couch was gone, replaced earlier that day by movers who had hauled the stained cushions and shattered lamp down the stairs. I tried to thank them but could barely speak. I walked slowly, touching walls, staring at places where the air still felt heavy. The kitchen counter, the doorway, the floor where I had collapsed. My abdomen ached sharply, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional bruising. I sank onto the new couch, sinking into soft fabric that did not carry the memory of panic, and let my head fall back. "I do not feel safe here," I whispered. Elena nodded without hesitation. "Then we change that." She spent the next hour walking through the apartment, testing the locks, checking windows, observing angles where shadows formed, and rearranging furniture in small ways that made the space feel less like a crime scene and more like a home reclaiming itself. The next morning, I met with my therapist, Dr. Myers, a calm woman with warm eyes who had taken over for Dr. Henderson's recommended specialist. She greeted me gently and asked how the trial went. I did not know where to begin. I told her everything, each memory scraping the surface of old wounds. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly. "You have lived for years in a prolonged state of hypervigilance," she said, "even when you did not consciously know it. Your body is only now realizing it can exhale, but it will take time. Healing is not a switch, it is a slow unraveling." I exhaled shakily. "I do not know how to move on from this." She nodded. "That is because you have not yet allowed yourself to mourn the relationship you wanted, not the one you had." Her words settled into me like a quiet truth. I had been grieving for years without understanding what I was losing. Not the sister I actually had, but the idea of the sister I wished she could be. Over the next weeks, my recovery followed a rhythm. Physical healing in the mornings, emotional healing in the afternoons. Evenings spent with Elena, who cooked at my stove while humming quietly, creating normalcy from scratch. Some nights I would wake with a jolt, heart pounding, convinced I heard the soft scrape of metal or the click of a latch. Elena would sit beside me in the dark until the panic passed, reminding me I was safe, that she was there. One afternoon, a packet arrived in the mail, thick and official. It was from the district attorney's office. Inside sat information about victims' rights, future parole hearings, and how to receive notifications about Samantha's status. I held the papers carefully, as if touching them too firmly might reopen something in my chest. Elena placed a hand on my shoulder. "You do not have to read it today, or ever if you do not want to." I nodded but set the packet aside. I knew I eventually would. Understanding what came next mattered, even if it hurt. 2 weeks later, my parents visited again. Their faces still carried the exhaustion of the trial, but there was something else now. A softness, a gentleness that had been missing for years. They hugged me carefully, lingering in a way that suggested they feared I might disappear if they let go too soon. We sat at the kitchen table drinking tea while sunlight spilled across the floor. My father cleared his throat. "We visited Samantha," he said quietly. I stared into my mug, waiting. "She is not doing well. She is angry, confused, blaming everyone but herself." My mother's voice cracked. "She asked about you, Grace. She wanted to see you." My chest tightened. "No." Mom nodded slowly. I know, sweetheart." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But it still hurts. She is my daughter. I do not know how to stop loving her." A soft wave of sympathy moved through me. I understood. I did not agree, but I understood. Loving someone and trusting them were two different languages, and my mother was fluent in one and illiterate in the other. I squeezed her hand back gently. I do not want you to stop loving her. I just need you to stop sacrificing me to protect her. She burst into tears. My father rubbed her back while she cried, and when she finally lifted her head, she whispered, I am so sorry for every moment I made you feel invisible. I swallowed hard. This time, the apology felt real. In the following weeks, I enrolled in a trauma support group for individuals recovering from familial violence. Sitting in a circle with strangers who carried their own versions of my story felt both heartbreaking and healing. We spoke about boundaries, about survival, about the complicated grief that formed when someone you loved hurt you in ways you never imagined possible. Each session loosened something tightly wound inside me. One evening after a meeting, a woman named Kayla approached me. She was older, probably in her late 50s, with a calm voice that felt like a steady hand on a shaking shoulder. You know, she said, it takes courage to stand up to someone who has been tearing you down your whole life. What happened to you was not your fault, but choosing to save yourself was your strength. Her words stayed with me. They stayed when I returned home, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, when I tried to imagine a future not shaped by Samantha's shadow. Healing came in small victories, sleeping through a night without nightmares, walking past the kitchen without flinching, laughing again. One afternoon, Elena dragged me to a pottery class. I sat at the wheel with clay spinning beneath my hands, the cold texture grounding me. I shaped something uneven and wobbly, but mine. Something created instead of destroyed. Elena beamed. Look at you. Making things again. Living again. My chest warmed. Maybe she was right. As the weeks turned into months, work slowly returned to my routine. My boss welcomed me back with compassion instead of pressure, assigning lighter projects until I felt stronger. I found myself designing spaces meant to bring people comfort. Sunlit living rooms, calm bedrooms, healing environments. Maybe I did it for clients. Maybe I did it for myself. Maybe both. One evening, as I tidied my living room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Not the broken woman I expected. Someone steadier. Someone rebuilding brick by brick. Someone who refused to stay trapped in the ruins Samantha left behind. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered something into the quiet darkness. I survived. I did. And I would keep surviving. Not just despite Samantha, but beyond her. Life settled into a different rhythm after the storm. A rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, but gradually softened into something steady, something almost warm. Months passed, and the sharp edges of memory dulled slightly, though the scars, both visible and invisible, remained as quiet reminders of everything I had endured. With therapy support and time, the world no longer felt like a place where danger waited behind every door. Instead, it felt like a place where I could finally breathe without fear tightening my chest. Work became a refuge again. The design firm welcomed me back slowly, and I found myself rediscovering pieces of joy in the creative process. I poured myself into sketches, color palettes, and fabrics, letting the act of creation fill spaces Samantha once occupied with chaos. My boss promoted me to lead designer on a new residential project after seeing how clients responded to the comforting environments I created. You design like someone who understands what people need to feel safe, he had said, and for the first time I accepted the compliment without hesitation. Maybe surviving what I survived had taught me something deeper about human spaces, how they could hold pain or heal it. Eventually, I moved out of the apartment where everything had happened. Even after months of therapy and grounding techniques, the weight of those rooms still clung to my skin. Elena helped me pack while music played softly in the background. We joked, cried a little, and sealed each box with more purpose than tape. I found a new place on the quiet edge of town, clean walls, tall windows, a small balcony overlooking a garden I hoped to fill with herbs and flowers. Standing in the empty living room of my new home, sunlight pouring across the floor, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope simple and unadorned. Elena stood beside me with her arms crossed. "This feels like you," she said. Finally. And she was right. The new apartment became a sanctuary. I placed soft plants on windowsills, filled bookshelves with stories that soothed me, hung art that made me breathe easier. No memories lived here yet, only possibilities. Over time, I also allowed myself to reconnect with parts of my life I had neglected. I started jogging again slow at first, testing my body's limits. I joined a weekend cooking class where I met people who saw me not as the victim of a horrific crime, but as someone interesting, someone worth knowing. It was in that class I met Jordan. He was warm, steady, and patient, with a quiet smile that made nervousness melt instead of sharpen. We bonded over our mutual inability to make a soufflé rise properly. He did not push or pry. He let me reveal myself on my own timeline piece by piece. When I finally told him everything, expecting him to recoil or grow distant, he simply took my hand gently and said, "No one should go through that. I am glad you are still here." His kindness felt like a balm on the parts of me that were still raw. Our relationship grew slowly, tenderly grounded in trust and mutual respect, things I had learned to value fiercely after spending a lifetime defending my reality from someone determined to rewrite it. My parents visited, often more present and attentive than they had ever been. The trial had cracked something in them, too. They no longer dismissed discomfort or doubts. They listened. They asked. They learned. Healing our relationship took time, but it felt possible in a way it never had before. One evening, my father stood on my balcony watering a pot of basil I had planted recently. He watched the sunset with a thoughtful expression before saying quietly, "We failed you in ways I do not think we will ever fully understand, but we will spend the rest of our lives trying to make it right." I rested my head on his shoulder. That is all I ever needed. My mother struggled more, caught between grief for the daughter she loved and guilt for the daughter she overlooked. But she worked at it. Therapy, conversations, accountability. She no longer excused Samantha's behavior, no longer softened the truth with wishful thinking. Some wounds between us remained delicate, but they were healing. Slowly. Honestly. One afternoon, Dr. Myers asked me a question that stayed with me long after the session ended. "What does your life look like now that you are no longer living in reaction to your sister?" I had not realized how much of my identity had been shaped by surviving, by enduring, by bracing. But now I found myself planning rather than fearfully anticipating. I signed up for a design retreat in Oregon. I started writing a personal journal. I hosted dinners with friends on weekends, filling my home with laughter instead of the silence that used to suffocate me. I decorated my new living room with photos of the people who were truly my family, not because of blood, but because of love and presence. Sometimes on quiet nights, I would trace the scar across my abdomen. It felt different now, not a symbol of fear, but of endurance, a mark of where my life split into a before and an after. I no longer wished it away. I honored it for the truth it carried, because in this new life I was building, I did not need to hide from my past. I needed only to grow beyond it. There are still nights when the past presses lightly against my consciousness like a hand tapping on a closed door. I do not open it anymore, but I acknowledge it is there. Healing did not erase what happened. It simply taught me how to live without letting the trauma script every step forward. My new home carries no whispers from those darker days. When I walk through the hallway, I hear only the hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of curtains, or Jordan laughing in the kitchen as he experiments unsuccessfully with a recipe we found online. Even silence feels different now. Not the tense quiet that once signaled danger, but a gentle stillness that belongs entirely to me. Some afternoons I sit on my balcony with a cup of tea watching the breeze move through the plants I've grown. Basil, mint, lavender. Things that smell like calm. Things I chose because I wanted them, not because I needed to prove something to anyone. On one of those afternoons my mother called. There was a long pause before she spoke. "A letter came today," she said softly. "It is from Samantha." My heart tightened, but not with panic. With something quieter. Resignation. Distance. My mother did not read it to me. She did not ask if I wanted to hear it. She simply said, "I will keep it in a drawer. You tell me if you ever want it. Or if you never do." Her voice carried no expectation. No pressure. Only understanding. I thanked her. And that was the end of it. After the call, I found myself looking at the scar along my abdomen. It had faded into a thin, pale line, but it would never disappear completely. I no longer wished it would. It marked only one moment of the story, but it held all the truths the years had hidden. I survived her. I survived the lies and the manipulations and the gaslighting that shaped so much of my childhood without me realizing how deeply it sunk into my bones. I survived the disbelief, the self-doubt, the quiet begging inside my own mind that pleaded for someone to see what was happening before it was too late. I survived the knife, and I survived the shattering that came afterward. Surviving changed me, not into someone harder, but into someone clearer. Someone who finally learned the difference between love and loyalty, between forgiveness and access, between family and familiar harm. People ask sometimes if I ever regret cutting ties completely, if I miss my sister, if I miss the idea of her. And the truth is complicated. I do sometimes miss the version of her I created in my mind, the sister I hoped she would become, the person she never was. But missing an idea is not a reason to suffer a reality. Samantha made choices rooted in delusion and control and obsession, choices that nearly cost me my life. And in the end, I had to make a choice too. A choice that was not about revenge or punishment. It was about survival. It was about finally choosing myself after years of choosing everyone else's comfort over my own safety. Sitting in the warm afternoon light, I realized something I wish I had understood sooner. Some relationships must end for your life to begin. Some boundaries must be drawn not to keep others out, but to let yourself remain intact. My parents still visit Samantha occasionally. They attend her therapy updates. They say she is improving in small ways, unraveling pieces of the delusions she built over the years. Sometimes they share gentle details, careful not to cross the legal boundary of no contact. I listen with detached compassion. I am glad she is receiving help. I hope she continues to heal in the ways she needs to. But healing does not mean returning to my life. And it never will. A few weeks ago, my therapist asked me a question that has continued to echo inside me. What would you say to someone who is living what you lived? Someone who is still unsure whether the warning signs are real? I did not hesitate when I answered. I would tell them to trust themselves. Trust the unease they feel in their body. Trust the patterns they keep noticing. Trust the fear that whispers even when everyone else tells them they are imagining things. And then I would tell them something even harder. You do not owe anyone access to your life simply because you share blood. You owe yourself safety first. Always. As I sit on my balcony watching the sky shift from blue to gold to the soft gray of evening, I think about how close my story came to ending differently. I think about the moment Samantha lifted the knife, the exact second the stitch snapped, and the cold shock of realizing she would rather tear me open than admit she was wrong. And I think about the choice I made afterward, the choice that saved me, the choice to survive, the choice to walk away. And so I leave you with the question that guided me then and continues to guide me now. How many chances would you give someone before finally choosing yourself? How long would you wait before protecting your life? And if the moment ever came when you had to make that decision, would you recognize that you deserve to survive too? If you are still here listening to my story, I want to speak directly to you, not as someone who survived something unthinkable, but as someone who understands what it feels like to question your own reality because someone close to you keeps rewriting it. Maybe you have lived with that quiet voice in your head telling you something is wrong, but you keep silencing it because family is supposed to love you. Maybe you have brushed off red flags because you were taught to forgive, to be patient, to give another chance and another and another. Maybe you have been told that you are dramatic, oversensitive, imagining things, or causing problems that do not exist. I believed those lies for years. I want to tell you this now: you are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. You are not the problem. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who insists they are protecting you. Sometimes the hand raised against you is disguised by years of familiarity. And sometimes the person who claims to love you is the very one dismantling your sense of self piece by piece until you no longer recognize your own instincts. If my story reached you today, I want it to do more than shock you. I want it to remind you that your safety matters, your peace matters, your truth matters, And you deserve a life where you do not have to explain or defend the wounds someone else caused, whether those wounds are emotional or physical. If you see yourself reflected in any part of my journey, please consider this your sign to pause and take a hard look at the relationships around you. You do not need a knife or a courtroom or a crisis to validate what you feel. Pain is enough. Fear is enough. Self-doubt that never existed before is enough. Patterns you cannot unsee are enough. And if someone close to you has shown you who they truly are, believe them the first time. If this story resonated, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes a story opens a door someone has been too afraid to walk through. Sometimes a story gives language to a feeling someone has not been able to name. And sometimes a story helps someone recognize they are not alone. You can also share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what part of the story hit hardest. Tell me if you have ever faced something similar, or if someone in your life has ever made you question your own reality. And if you have never experienced anything like this, but you stayed until the end, thank you. Thank you for giving space to a story that was hard to tell. Stories like mine often go unheard because people assume things like this could never happen in real life. But they do, more often than we want to believe. By listening, by sharing, by talking openly about these experiences, you help others feel seen when they have spent years feeling invisible. If you found strength in this story, or if you simply want to support more real experiences being told honestly, please take a moment to like this video. It might seem small, but it helps these stories reach someone who might be in the darkest moment of their life right now. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, survival, healing, and the hard truths that shape who we become, subscribe to the channel. Every story I share comes from a place of honesty and a desire to help others reclaim their voices the way I reclaimed mine. Lastly, I want to leave you with this: choosing yourself is not selfish, it is survival. Walking away from someone who hurts you is not abandonment, it is courage, and protecting your peace is not unkind. It is necessary. Whatever you are facing, wherever you are listening from, remember this: you deserve a life where your boundaries are respected and your wounds are not dismissed. You deserve safety, you deserve healing, and you deserve to survive in your own story. Thank you for being here with me today. Stay safe. Trust your instincts and take care of your heart.